Fin the Week is brought to you by Indulge, a digital agency built on thinking for the global financial services industry.
Hey there, and welcome to episode 2 of the podcast. I'm Amelia.
I'm Paul.
I'm Russell.
I'm Pat.
I'm Beth.
I'm Mark.
And this is Fin the Week. So a big group today. How's everybody doing?
Very well, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, good.
Good.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Good. And some new faces as well, which is lovely. So last week, episode 1, we started talking about AI, and of course we're building on that today. And we've got a controversial statement to kick around this week. I'm going to replace my design team with AI. Who came up with that? Was that you, Paul?
Yes, yeah, it was. Yeah, it's because the whole industry is talking. Well, the whole world feels like it's talking about jobs that are going to be replaced by AI, and design's a particularly interesting one, I think, because it's got. Well, first of all, Russell raised the point in the last episode about, well, what is design? And that got me thinking, actually, yeah, design is a lot more than what I imagined when I thought about that. Because when I thought of that question, I thought about the type of design we do, which is interface design and UX design. But actually then after that, I watched a review of a car that was designed by AI. And the idea was that no part of the material goes to waste because AI was able to create these organic structures that built the car and made it really efficient. I thought, oh yeah, that's design and that's replacing humans. But yeah, I thought it'd be a good kind of controversial topic to discuss really and see what our kind of design experts on the team think about that.
So yeah, we've got Beth, we've got Mark, both with design backgrounds, and of course we've got Russ as well. So what is kind of your kind of knee-jerk reaction to that statement?
Shall I go first?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely very topical at the moment. And the design process is changing rapidly almost every day because of AI. And there's new processes that we're kind of almost forced to having to kind of adopt. And I think the essence, before I explain some of those, I think the essence of design kind of remains the same. It's always kind of difficult, I guess. Having been to, a design school, I was at a design school for probably 4 years in Bristol. It's always difficult, I think, going into a commercial environment with other people who probably don't understand the kind of the essence of what design is and what it means and what it exists for. So you're kind of constantly battling almost with the entire organization to explain what design is and how important it is and how it can deliver some amazing results. Almost to the point where if designers aren't heard, they kind of just become operators. They kind of just become production staff. They kind of just become the ones that you hand a wireframe to or a scope and say, can you make it pretty, or, can you jazz it up a bit? Are those like the famous words? And designers often in organizations that I've seen just become implementers of other people's ideas and other people's problems that they've solved and make them look good. And that isn't design. And that's really a fundamental shift that if you get right in an organization can have a massive impact. And design, the way I see it and the meaning of design is design exists to solve a problem or meet a need. And it's that initial need or problem which is usually set by the client at a high level. It could be set perhaps by a team, a marketing team, for example, might need something, although it's probably less of a problem to solve and more of a production role in that case. But certainly, the way I've been schooled about design is, at uni, for example, which was a long time ago, probably 25 years ago now, I was at uni in the early 2000s. And we were never kind of asked to design anything. We were always asked to solve a problem. We were always given a brief and it was like, here's your brief, come up with this, with this idea, which kind of solves a need, and then you decide what kind of method to use and you piece it all together and then you'd almost, as part of your exploration work at the start, create a hypothesis to kind of test and see if it kind of solves that need. I think so. There's kind of two different types of designer, really. I think the designers who just do production, I think those roles, you will see those roles kind of disappear because of AI, because you can style things so quickly. You can put in frameworks and a lot of design theory into things like, Markdown, and use Claude, and it can deliver designs. But ultimately, that's just a production method to solve the problem. And it's that initial problem and solving it and the output, which is and still remains the design process. It's almost quite hard to explain. So I'm kind of bumbling my way through it a bit. But I used the example of a chair last week. And I think that I feel like I need to see that through, because how do you design a chair is a really interesting one, because everyone's probably sat on a chair. So you can kind of relate. But, designing a chair, you think about the problem to solve is, we need an end result, which is something that someone can sit on, right? But at the beginning of that process, you need to ask a number of questions. You need to say, who's using it? Do they have any access needs, for example, accessibility needs that we need to take into account specifically for this chair? What kind of environment is this chair going to live in? Is it going to be hot? Is it going to be cold? Is it going to be in someone's lounge? Is it going to be something they can just kind of chill in? It doesn't need to fold up. Is it going to be at the beach? There's loads of questions you need to ask in order to design something which seems as simple as a chair. And then there's the commercial viability of that chair. What's the materials that it should use? What kind of trade-offs do we need to make in the production process to meet those kind of business requirements? And all of this creates a kind of hypothesis which you test when you produce that chair, and you test it with the people who are going to sit on it. You wouldn't use AI to come up with an idea for a chair, manufacture the chair, and then put it in all the shops, because that's probably going to go disastrously wrong. And I think it's quite a good example, because if you think about designing a chair and getting a designer involved, I think the opinion might be that the designer just thinks about what color it is and perhaps what material to use. But actually, the designer comes up with that whole problem to solve, and that's the school of design, and that's kind of the design thinking, is that, designers, in my opinion, should be higher up in the chain. But when it comes to, not being given a brief on what to do, but just being given a problem to solve, think about how that solution aligns with business objectives, how it's commercially viable, how it can be produced, and how we can test it and validate it, but before it goes to market, and then continue to test it and validate it and measure it until we get it right. That's how I see the design process. And AI obviously comes in and speeds up production. It can help with idea generation. It can do loads of stuff, but I can't see it ever really taking away that kind of initial step where someone thinks about what to do to solve a problem, and then also becomes accountable for that, and tests it and validates it at the end. And I've used the example of a chair, but you could apply that entire process to a website, an app, anything you could think of, a car. But that's high level how I see design. I think I'd be worried if I was just a production designer, like a Figma operator, that kind of designer. I think you definitely need to be thinking strategically, and you need to be experimenting with all these tools as well. But I don't think AI changed the design process, that kind of traditional design process. Just one final thing, because I could talk about this for an hour. I think the process that it has introduced, which is really interesting, is supporting AI things that supporting and consulting on things that are AI generated. So there's that kind of traditional process where you kind of do the research, you produce something and you test it. I think that will remain. But the interesting process we're seeing now is you get engineers and developers with their army of Claudes, and they're going to go away and produce something which looks really amazing, to be honest, a really amazing interface. And we don't want to stop that process as designers. We don't want to say, developers or marketeers or project managers shouldn't be exploring, designing interfaces and creating them. I think the process that we're kind of being forced to adapt to, is just to allow that process to happen, and then the designers kind of come in as more of a consultant, and basically kind of provide some guidance on, why they think things should go in certain places and interfaces based on their experience, how to introduce some success metrics to kind of see if this work is going to, have an impact and meet those kind of business objectives. And it's a completely new process that, we are adapting to. But I certainly wouldn't want to hold up that new process that AI is bringing, where other people can design interfaces. And then you have the more traditional, discovery, research, do some mock-ups, with the designers now also being able to produce quite advanced prototypes using AI. So yeah, it's a bit messy at the moment. And we're kind of figuring out the best way to do things, and it will almost certainly be per project, depending on who's working on it, and what the project objectives are. But it's a really exciting time because so many people can kind of get involved in that creation of websites and apps now, more than ever before. I'll end it there for now.
So, I mean, there's a lot to kind of unpick there. Has anyone got any thoughts on what Russ has said?
And I've got some thoughts just quickly before we get some feedback from Mark as well. I think that'd be really useful to see your big change really to see now is in the tools. So the tools out there allow to produce good looking layouts, and that's the keyword. They're good looking, not necessarily well functioning, good looking layouts. These tools allow, like if you're a developer and you haven't really got any design experience, you can just go into Claude and say, build me an interface, and it'll come up with an interface that at first glance looks really nice. And that ability to create a nice interface is something that traditionally a designer would have had to have done, but AI does it now. However, what AI can't do is make that interface function really well in addition to looking nice. It's the devil's in the detail when it comes to really good application design or an interface design. It's about making sure the validation appears in the right place and the user journeys are bang on and everything's consistent. And I think that from a kind of technical perspective, that human input and having experience in design, producing those interfaces that work really well as looking good, you definitely still need a human for that. I think you probably will for some time. And so that's just my kind of feedback there, yeah.
So Mark, what are your thoughts?
There's an awful lot to unpack with it. I think, obviously in the current situation we're in, it's very new and everyone's trying to kind of find their feet with it, in terms of adopting these kind of new practices into like a workflow or a process or anything like that. So I think there's challenges, even at a business our scale, but obviously industry wide. I mean, what Paul was talking about at the start, it'd be interesting to see, how AI is kind of influencing product design from that perspective. But from my perspective, kind of working in UX and UI design, I believe AI will make the collaborative process a lot easier. I think it will bring people together at the start, like engineers, consultants, stakeholders, designers can all go in a room and flesh out ideas, and where AI brings the advantage at that point is obviously, their speed can bring things together, and you can get initial solutions out quite rapidly. Those solutions aren't necessarily correct, and then the experienced, human side of things can you can apply your experience further down the line to make these solutions correct. But essentially, it can make people collaborate a lot quicker. In terms of graphic design, that's where I see the challenges. I think AI is making design a lot more accessible to people. And I'm seeing an awful lot of, I can do this, or I've done this, and, and it's very much about the I. And, those people who are using it in that way are not thinking about, the UX things in terms of who, what the problem is there to be solved, who are you solving that problem for? You see what I mean? Those kinds of requirements. So those rapid solutions are, they may work for a bit, but they're going to fail because of the lack of thinking around these types of things. But I mean, in my own processes, I am starting to kind of integrate it into what I do. With designs, it can allow you to validate solutions really quite quickly, and that's really useful, especially when you're kind of working with complex systems and stuff like that. You can test things, you can get solutions in front of users, they can test it, they can feedback. It makes that iterative process a lot easier. So I think at the moment, I think it's great. I think it's a real positive thing. It's that adaptation and kind of making, everything kind of streamline with it.
And you touched there upon, you mentioned graphic design. And according to the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs 25 report, graphic design is number 11 on the list of fastest declining jobs. So this is happening, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. I found that like a mind-blowing stat. And in terms of, what they're talking about there is that the rapid production of things like social media posts, or the ability to produce. I always think the graphic design skills are with typography and creation and branding, and applying those skills there in those kind of upfront tasks. So I feel there's always going to be a need for that. I know a few illustrators as well who have they're the ones who are suffering because it's so easy to generate that style of kind of imagery at the moment, or specify a style of imagery. So, that's difficult. In that line of work, people are kind of going away, creating illustrations, writing storybooks, publishing it, and doing it kind of within a day, which seems madness. But yeah, I think speed kind of leads to a lot less quality. You see what I mean? And I think the people that will stand out are the ones that focus on quality.
And also, just to add to that, you lose a lot of authenticity as well. So big brands, which I've seen this, I can't remember who it was, but they basically put a human-made kind of stamp on this advertising campaign that they did, and it was all like illustrated, like by a professional illustrator who they actually highlighted their profile as part of the campaign, who did it. That's going to be much more powerful for the big brands that can afford to do it than, using AI to quickly manufacture some of this work. So I think there's going to be different cases, isn't there, for kind of using it. I mean, a small agency like ours, without any professional illustrators, it could be a really, handy, it's a really handy feather to our hat in terms of like a style of graphics that we can produce quite easily, but we certainly wouldn't, position ourselves as expert illustrators, and we would let the client know if we, I would let the client know if I'd kind of use AI to produce an amazing illustration, because of a couple of reasons. I think from a licensing aspect, that's really important to think about as well. If you produce anything, do you have a commercial license to use it in a campaign? You need to think about that. So you need to be upfront about the source of that artwork. But yeah, I think human-made, kind of handmade stamps are going to be quite powerful. Quite a powerful thing to be putting on things like illustration and music and that side of it.
That's interesting you touched upon that, Russ, because that was actually something I was going to ask. When it comes to your clients, how transparent you have to be, and how much do they care if they've got a good end product? Do you find that clients really want to know step by step how you got to the, that final product? Is it something that you are seeing more of, or, so how does that kind of work?
Well, from a graphic design perspective, um, I think it's just when it comes down to licensing, really, and how it's made. I don't think I just see AI as a production tool. If we use AI to create a prototype or write some code, or it certainly isn't. It's just part of the process now, and that's happened quite quickly. So almost how we produce it is kind of up to it's just part of the kind of steps that we take to produce something. And the way I see it, I mean, I'm not a developer, but we used to use Stack Overflow quite a bit. It kind of copy and paste a lot of code from there. We certainly wouldn't explain that whole process to a client the same way we wouldn't explain using AI. We use like icon sets, in design. We use stock photography. Stock kind of background creative, and often it's free and just becomes part of our process. And we wouldn't kind of always, always kind of explain exactly where all of that came from, especially if it gives us ideas to build upon.
The thing I found interesting from the World Economic Forum report that we looked at was graphic design was one of the fastest declining jobs, but UI and UX design are were the 8th most in demand. So they're obviously growing in demand. And does that tie back to what you were saying earlier, Russell, that design isn't making things look nice, it's solving a problem? And actually, could you see it that UI and UX designers are the problem solvers maybe, and the graphic design element is perhaps more at risk from AI because it's, I suppose, I'm massively oversimplifying this here, but it's putting the paint on, isn't it, and making things graphically look good, and that's where AI can assist. Is that a fair assessment?
I think there's a couple of things going on with those, with those, with that report, because I also saw Autodesk analyzed 3 million AI job listings in the last couple of years, and design skills came out on top as the most in-demand skill. So, and technical and coding and all of those were beneath that, which was a real surprise to me. And it's quite relevant to the topic of this podcast. But I think a couple of things are happening with that. Graphic design, there's a lot of subsets of graphic design. Kind of going back to when I was at uni again, I studied graphic design, but on my course, I specialize in all the interactive media modules. I chose a route of interactive media on that course, and I was doing a lot of action scripting and 3D animation, and my final piece was this 3D environment where you could click on different elements and they would respond and represent different sounds, which I was going to take that piece of work and that research and do an MA, but I was just really keen to kind of get out of uni and start earning some money, to be honest. But that was all under graphic design. But essentially it was, UI design, thinking about user experience. There was other people doing graphic design who were quite heavily on the print side of things. They were doing screen printing. They were really obsessed by kind of typography. It's such a broad umbrella. And I think probably what's happened, as well as the decline in that job role, you probably don't get as many traditional graphic designers as you used to. People are much more specialized now. They're specialized in UX, they're specialized in UI. Perhaps, 10, 20 years ago, or 10 years ago, those people probably might have labeled themselves as graphic designers, but been doing a kind of UX UI role. So that might be part of why you're seeing this kind of change in job roles, and some what you could say is a subset of graphic design, like moving up that list, because less people are labeling themselves as kind of graphic designers. Yeah, I do think from like a UX perspective, I think the reason why it's probably rising in demand, I think, because alongside AI, how do you measure the output of AI generated work when it comes to interface design, and how do you create evidence-based AI work which meets the objectives of a business? And ultimately it comes back to ROI. So if you have a business which employs a production team, you don't want to risk investing all that money into the production team without making sure that you can measure the outcome of what you've done, that there is some research, and that you have someone or a team of people involved to kind of understand the user. And design is essentially the difference I see a lot with, designers and perhaps engineers, is designers that naturally have that empathy and that understanding towards the end user, which is quite a difficult skill to learn. And that's probably why perhaps these people almost became, designers and UX designers in the first place, because it's quite a difficult skill to learn. But I think those kind of softer human skills is what makes this whole AI production process work and what makes it valuable. And I think what kind of gives the best possible ROI for that business investing in it.
I was going to ask, come back to the point we discussed about, do clients care about how you reach the result? And I was going to say, Beth, from your experience, because you're sort of have an interest in design, but you also are project manager. And in your experience, do clients during a project, are they desperate to know the detail about how we achieve what we achieve, or are they purely focused on the end result? And does AI change that?
I think it's all moving so rapidly that it's still quite a new conversation, and it's not something that we've kind of encountered much actually so far. I think as we go on, it will crop up more and more. And I think there'll be, like we discussed recently internally, where does the ethics debate come into this? Should we be disclosing what we're using AI to support us with, and how much of our output is supported by that? And I think it comes back to that whole point we've been discussing around output versus outcomes. You've got the kind of the how and the what. AI is really good at that if you want something to be kind of churned out quickly. But thinking about the outcomes and the why, that's the important bit. And I suppose that's where we've got this overlap of what do we disclose, what have we done, and we haven't really encountered that yet. So I think it's something that will definitely crop up more in the future, and it's moving so quickly at the moment that I don't think, if there were any guidelines or legislation, it's probably not able to kind of keep up with the pace at which this is all changing. I think we've already noticed it since the new year. I have definitely, talking to the team, previously we'd have had calls where, perhaps we're a bit behind schedule and we might need to talk to the client about how we implement something. And actually now it's so much quicker. There's so many more ways that we can do it. And perhaps other team members that couldn't previously pick up work or a specific task are now picking up those tasks. So it's changing every aspect of how we work. And yeah, I think that remains a bit of an unknown for now, Paul. And I think it will depend on if any guidelines or legislation comes in, and perhaps we need to look internally at how we, what's our own rule book, what are our own guidelines, and are we upfront with our clients about how we use it? And that might be a good way to kind of lead on that.
If I can just, from a sort of coding perspective, we're using it largely. Our clients are just really happy with the work we're doing because we're able to deliver more features. We're able to turn work around much more quickly. We don't always disclose that we're using AI because, like you said, Russell, earlier, it's just a tool. It's another tool that we're using to just do work more efficiently and to a higher degree of quality. So, I was with a client actually yesterday. We were talking through a proposal to solve a problem that they were having. And I was actually really honest with that meeting. And I said to them, we've got a solution to your problem here, and we're using AI to deliver the solution. And actually, because we're using AI, it's going to cost significantly less than if we would have pitched this 2 or 3 years ago. And as such, and as a result, what we're proposing now is a really compelling solution to the problem we're facing. Whereas 2 or 3 years ago, the cost would have been prohibitive to roll out that solution. As part of that pitch, I was like, we're using AI to really solve this problem in a really efficient and rapid way for you. Received really positively, and I think where we do mention that we're using AI, it's received really positively. The assumption is that they just kind of assume we are. Maybe they don't. But honestly, if a client said to us, you're not allowed to use AI, we would genuinely question whether it's worth us taking on that client, because it would feel quite backwards going back to how we used to work.
I guess that's where the importance of kind of tracking and understanding, the goals you set with a client and then the outcomes at the end are the important parts. The time, the mechanism for delivery that happens in the middle. I mean, have they ever really cared about that? If you're talking about kind of setting up CMSs and stuff, that gives you something to focus on in terms of selling. Well, these days it's much more, establishing the requirements to deliver the outcomes at the end, and that's where the quality will show through, and that ability to kind of engage in that process, with users, with the tools to kind of show clients that you are delivering those outcomes is going to be really important for agencies going forward.
And I suppose it's, that's the whole relationship thing with your clients, just having that trust in you to know that you are going to, create the best outcome with the tools that that you are experts in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always about kind of building a relationship with a client so you can kind of have that back and forth. And, obviously they want a product delivered to a certain time, and they're, with pretty much 90% of the projects, it works that way. But then it's the relationship afterwards in terms of, tracking those metrics, making sure that they're happy, extending the functionality or reducing it dependent on how a user engages with it. That's the interesting part. What happens afterwards in terms of, understanding user behavior, especially within the types of products that we build.
I when I was looking at the car example, and how they used AI in that, the brief for the generative AI would have been to basically avoid any form of waste and create elements of the vehicle that are as light as they can possibly be and as strong as they can possibly be. And I was thinking about, in the type of UI design we do and what our clients are interested in, I suppose the key thing is to make it as usable as it can possibly be and to comply with regulations. So consumer duty is a big topic of discussion in the financial services sector, and making sure that an interface and a piece of communication can be understood by the end user. It's not just a process they can work through, but they actually need to be seen to be understanding it. Is there a place for AI to help us in validating that sort of thing? Because I suppose when you're designing a physical product like a car, you can literally validate it because you can weigh the car and you can test it. Can you use AI in a similar way in a kind of more knowledge-based sector?
There's usability principles and accessibility and, all these things that kind of relate to consumer duty, that you could almost train AI on, I suspect, that, you can plug in and then validate any solution, whether it's AI generated or human generated. I think if it can assist in making that side of things much more efficient, then, that again just helps the process and helps deliver on the outcomes, in the right way. So I think, again, it's training that, and kind of using it in that kind of advanced way, that, I mean, I'm not seeing any of that yet, but it'd be really interesting to explore.
It's kind of two-pronged, isn't it? It's using those frameworks to review or audit, as we sometimes refer to it, kind of audit existing products and evolve them, and also using those frameworks to create new products, which, would potentially going to deliver better results, starting from scratch and using these kind of frameworks for accessibility and for consumer duty. I do think on the accessibility side of things, though, just conforming to a framework like, WCAG 2.2 or something is only really a checkbox. I think you still need to be testing with, these products with people with access needs to understand, how they're using them, and whether the way that they set up their screen readers, can be used on your website, and it isn't just like a kind of, checkbox in this list. So I think human validation, user testing is still going to throw up loads of really important feedback into these products, as well as just conforming to some of these rules that, are going to be a lot easier to kind of train AI to kind of work through and build products to essentially that specification. I did also have a final point. I think in terms of like the job market, I know there's a lot of talk about, maybe consolidating roles and it being difficult for juniors to kind of get into, companies and get a starting point, and whether there was, anything to be discussed around that side of it. Because, if I was a graduate now, I'd definitely be concerned that, is what I would have had as, the initial work that I would have done somewhere, is that all now being done by the rest of the team using AI? How do I get started in a company where all this kind of junior work is perhaps not required anymore? I do think on that topic, I think the really talented designers will find a way, into the job market. I think you need to be in that kind of top bracket, that top 20% bracket. They'll always find a way in, and they'll always adapt. And I think the key thing is to any young designers is, is almost approach it with a bit of a blank slate, because these processes are changing so quickly every day. And in some ways it might be easier for them because they kind of join a business and they've got no preconceptions about, traditional processes or old tools. They're not tied, they might not be tied to Adobe Suite or Figma, which is kind of difficult perhaps for some designers to move away from. So it's quite an exciting time for those kind of graduates to just have an open mind, start building, I think would be the other thing I'd say. Now is the time for designers to be building and creating more than ever before using AI. Experiment, build a portfolio, redesign websites, working websites, come up with your own apps, build your portfolio around that, because it's a really exciting time to get some, amazing work out there in your portfolio as a young designer.
Yeah, I think there's always that need for fresh ideas, from young people kind of coming into the industry. I guess in terms of, their learning path and, understanding tool sets, like you say, it's a different world now. If you've got the ability to kind of sit and prompt and introduce and interrogate those ideas, you can get something out there quite quickly. It's, you don't need the tool sets to do it. Going back to what we were talking about with graphic designers, I think still, there's an element of training, obviously, to understand, colorway and typography and those kind of basic things that you would learn at college. But the ability to just experiment and challenge the norm with fresh ideas, I think everyone can do, but especially young people, because it's their environment. I had a really interesting conversation with a couple of guys who work at different agencies last week, actually, in terms of who they're looking to employ. And one guy was very much, we want seniors. We want senior people to come in and slot in, and they can do this job. And the other guy was like, yeah, but we're trying to encourage juniors in because of this fresh thinking, the ability we can sit them down in front of a prompting program, LLM or whatever, and they can come up with ideas and really challenge the concept of what a senior would effectively think is a straightforward UI that serves a particular purpose. Why not challenge those ideas? So yeah, I was very much with the young guy and that thinking, even though I'm quite old myself.
Not at all. I mean, we're kind of coming towards the end of the discussion. So has anyone got any kind of last thoughts? Maybe going back to the kind of original statement, which is, I'm going to replace my design team with AI. Has anyone got any kind of a summary of, what we've just discussed in maybe a sentence?
I'm convinced that we should keep them.
I read a really interesting article today from Don Norman, and he had a comment about it, and he said the skill set is becoming obsolete, the discipline is ascending, pivot accordingly. That's quite a nice way of kind of putting it, I think. And everyone has to kind of reassess themselves at certain points in their lives, and I think, you know, we're at that point, all of us, in terms of what we do, especially within the digital industry.
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously incredibly biased on this one, but I think we should be doing more design. But we should definitely be open to doing design in a different way. And I think, yeah, that's probably all I have to say on it.
Right then. Well, this is the most exciting bit for me. We are moving on now to Jargon Busters. This is our weekly feature. Beth and Mark, let me explain it to you. So we have got a list of industry terms that you may or may not be familiar with, and I'm going to pick one at random and see if you guys know what it means. Last week we did all right, didn't we? It was unicorn last week, and you were all kind of on the right lines, weren't you?
Yeah, horse with the horn.
Horse with a horn, exactly. So this week's phrase is pump and dump. Does that mean anything to any of you?
I'm going to go first because I think it's when there's a kind of a meme stock in investing and you put loads of money into it and you get out before it plummets and you lose all your money.
Anyone else?
Crypto, isn't it? The crypto bros, sort of. It happened famously with OpenClaw recently. When the dude who invented OpenClaw, when he first launched it, he launched it under the name ClaudeBot, and then Anthropic issued a copyright injunction against him. So he changed the name from ClaudeBot to Maltbot, and then someone jumped on the ClaudeBot name, pumped a ClaudeBot meme coin, made loads of money out of it, and you know, it just sort of the price spiked and then like crashed again. And they're the people who like pumped that ClaudeBot meme coin, made a load of money because they pumped and dumped that coin.
I think it could just be any stock though, not just crypto. Was it GameStop or GameStop? Yeah. There's a really good documentary about it where wasn't it going out of business or something, and then like the Reddit, there was like this big Reddit community that kind of got behind it and just like increased the price of it, like crazy increased the price of it, and then everyone tried to kind of get out. Guess that could be a pump and dump as well. There might be a bit more to that one.
Yeah, it sounds like slang, doesn't it? My best guess would be along the lines of what Pat and Russ have just said, sort of someone who's actively pushing something with a view to getting out when it's at its peak, I suppose. But it also sounds like it's like a brag kind of term, isn't it? I can imagine people slapping each other on the back and saying that was a good pump and dump.
Yeah, I wonder. It sounds like a city term, doesn't it? Yeah, stocks and shares, that kind of. Got a pump and dump today.
Something they talk about in industry, maybe.
Yeah, it's got a Wolf of Wall Street vibes for sure.
Exactly. Oh, so officially, the definition is artificially inflating a stock price through false claims to sell at a profit.
So it's actually more on the illegal side of things than maybe we were giving it credit for.
Yeah, maybe.
Or at least immoral.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Pretty unethical, yeah.
But we'll have more jargon busters next week, of course. And talking next week, our next episode, we're looking at a controversial patent approval for Google. What does that outline, Paul?
Yeah, so this last week I joked about needing an emergency episode of the podcast, and this is probably the first one because, Google has been granted a patent to what they've described, and we'll get into it next time, is that if they deem a landing page on a website to be not up to scratch, they could use AI to create their own version of it so that the end user sees what they've created and not what the website owners have created. And now it's not actually happening right now. It's just a concept that they've had approved. But I think we spoke about it earlier this week in our team, and we were all kind of a bit shocked by it. And I think, it could be quite a juicy topic to get into.
There's all sorts of compliance headaches,
God,
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Looking
Yeah,
forward
and branding as well. Branding too.
Mm.
Well, looking forward to chatting more about that next week. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you for listening. And as I say, we'll be back next week.
Before we go, it's time for a quick shameless plug. This episode was brought to you by Indulge, a digital agency built on thinking for the global financial services sector. If you're looking for an agency that can specialize in UX and design, production, and marketing, then look no further. To find out more, visit indulge.digital. Thanks for listening.